Hi guys, welcome to part 2 really of this tutorial on the summer 2019 AQA Macbeth question. In the last video I kind of went through the question, thinking about what we'd talk about, our planning for what we'd incorporate from the rest of the play. And in this session I'm going to just go through a grade 9 sort of high full mark answer and sort of talk you through how I approach this. So I have chosen to start with the extract. And again, I've said before, there's a number of ways you can do this. It doesn't matter, you don't have to, even though it does say starting with it. It just means you're sort of jumping off point. I have chosen to zoom in on the extract because it's there in front of me. I find that a bit easier. So I'm going to talk about, it gives us one of our first impressions of Macbeth. Interestingly, Shakespeare introduces his eponymous hero as being brave. I just think, try and get in as much as possible Shakespeare doing stuff. That sense that we need to achieve of having the writer's craft. As being brave, and I've got an embedded quote there. In this context, a battle, Macbeth is Valor's minion and performs outstandingly for his king. The captain's report demonstrates that Macbeth is violent but in an acceptable form. Here he is fighting multiplying villainies, and consequently his violent acts are not only acceptable, they are praiseworthy. The use of the metaphor smoked with bloody execution highlights the fact Macbeth has no qualms with spilling the blood of a rebel such as the merciless MacDonald. The noun execution really reinforces that Macbeth's violence within the battle is justified. He's doing a necessary deed, one which proves his loyalty. So hopefully you can see lots of analysis. I've got lots of embedded quotes all the way through. I've looked at Shakespeare's technique with things like metaphor, and as I say, embedded quotes all the way through that. So going on to, the captain goes on to graphically describe the way that Macbeth seamed his enemy, creating an image of material being pulled apart. We're also told that there was a beheading, and that the head was fixed upon our battlements. Hopefully again you can see lots and lots of use of embedded quotes. I don't need to every single word zoom in on. I'm using them to support my overall comments and points about Macbeth and his violence. Again, when dealing with disloyal, traitorous rebels, Macbeth's violence is depicted as justified. He enforces the law and helps maintain the rightful chain of command. So there's a bit of context there. Just implied context, which is fine. Audiences, through this report of the battle, can admire Macbeth's skill and commitment. Yes, he's violent, but he's a soldier, and as such, warfare is arguably acceptable violence. So we're thinking about the idea of effects on audiences as well. Okay, moving on. Of course, this appropriate behaviour is soon rejected along with his loyalty to Duncan. Audiences are appalled to witness the corrupting influence of the witches, his wife, but mostly his own ambition. So there's something evaluative there as well. Soon Macbeth's violence is brutal and increasingly cowardly. In fact, he eventually abuses his power to such a degree that he forces others to commit repugnant acts of violence for him. His black and deep desires soon manifest themselves into an act of regicidal treason. So see how I've got a link to the rest of the play just from that extra quote I've got. And whilst plagued with doubts, Macbeth uses the forceful verb clutch during his hallucination of the dagger that leads him to Duncan. The imperative come, blah, 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 also indicates a strong desire to go through with a brutal act of murder. This is no battlefield. This is a calculated and unforgivable act of betrayal. The contrast between brave and noble Macbeth the soldier and the vaulting ambition of Macbeth the cold-blooded murderer is stark, and audiences are compelled to a state of horror. I've got more effects here, and I've got a kind of my own analytical comparison of that change in Macbeth. Although the original play would not depict the murder of Duncan, so there's context here and stagecraft. More modern performances certainly focus on the savagery of this attack, effectively cementing his role as a violent villain. So that real link to the question there. Macbeth's violence escalates at a startling rate. So there's an evaluation here. Audiences are left aghast at the killing of Macbeth's family. Macbeth seems to have lost any shreds of conscience he had. After killing Duncan, he longs for the knocking at the gate to wake him, and yet, as his paranoia increases, so does his appetite for violence and desire to obliterate any threat to his kingship. Really sort of detailed analysis and evaluation of the way that violence is presented. Shakespeare vividly shows, again, focus on that writer's craft. shows Macbeth's violent, unstoppable bloodlust through the poignant killing of Macduff's wife and children. In focusing the audience's attention onto innocent victims, he once more juxtaposes the previously moral and acceptable violence with this truly horrific and tyrant-like behaviour. So there's a sense here of structure, Shakespeare's use of contrasting those different behaviours. Structurally, this violence needs to intensify as it serves as a catalyst, as a structural technique there, for Macduff to seek revenge and allow through a resolution and restoration to the great chain of being. So, again, implied context. You don't need to bolt on contextual factors. Without Macbeth's increasingly appalling violence, he may never have been challenged and defeated. Ironically, the violence he uses to protect himself becomes his very demise. Interestingly, in the extract, we are told Macbeth was disdaining fortune, which potentially foreshadows more structure, his maniacal ego. The attitude that served him well in battle was a contributing factor to his downfall. In the end, we see Macbeth electing to put on his harness, which is armour, and die a soldier's death, fighting to the death and being immersed in a culture of bravery and dying with honour. So again, implied context means that he chooses to fight Macduff despite realising the juggling fiends had manipulated him and he would likely die. So embedded quotes all the way through, guys. Ironically, his head is also fixed upon the battlements, creating a cyclical structure where acts of treason are met with violent punishment. So this is structure and valuation. Macbeth enacted violence upon his king, his best friend, and even innocent children. He states in Act 5 that he has almost lost the taste of fears, and audiences can tell with his apathetic and desensitised response, evaluation, to Lady Macbeth's death that violence no longer affects him. Ultimately, Shakespeare presents us with a character who once was able to channel his violence into honourable outlets, but once driven to abuse his power, meets a grisly and violent end himself. Okay, a grade 9, full mark response, context, quotes, methods, Shakespeare's purpose, the lot. Hope that helps. Thanks, guys.